Welcome to the second day of the LSE German Symposium and our event with the title, The Women's Quota for Diverse Leadership, Breakthrough or Intervention in Entrepreneurial Freedom. The event will be chaired by Ilka Hartmann, Managing Director at the British Chamber of Commerce in Germany, one of our partners. We are looking forward to a lively discussion and questions from the audience in the Q&A section, some of which will be posted at the end of the discussion. Dear Ms. Hartmann, over to you.
Yes, welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation. And we are happy to support the German Symposium as a British Chamber of Commerce in Germany. The decision to introduce a quota for women on management boards has sparked much debate in the recent weeks. For some, such a law is an intervention on entrepreneurial freedom, which may see as economically damaging for concerned companies. For others, the law creates more freedom, reduces discrimination, and improves equal opportunities for women, not only in the labor market, but in the society as a whole. Since 2015, larger companies that are listed have had to set so-called targets for increasing the proportion of women in management positions. 75% of those companies have either set no target or a zero target at board level. The German government saw a need for action in this regard and passed the new law for a quota for women in management positions in both the private and the public sector on January 6 this year. In the future, a board of more than 3 members must include at least 1 woman and 1 man. The target figure 0 is subject to explanation. The fixed supervisory board quota introduced in 2016 in the private sector has led to a significant increase in the average proportion of women and stood at 35.2% last November. The unregulated proportion of women on the board has developed less positively in comparison. Minister Giffey calls the new law a milestone and expects similarly positive development in filling board positions with women. Is a women's quota for diverse leadership a breakthrough, or is it an intervention in entrepreneurial freedom? This we will discuss with 3 absolute experts today: Janina Kugel, Daniela Weber-Rey, and State Minister for Digital Affairs at the Federal Chancellery, Dorothee Bär. Since we only have 35 minutes for our session, I will only introduce them very briefly, and I think most of them are very well known. Janina Kugel is a non-executive board member, senior advisor, and speaker. Prior to this, she has been Chief Human Resource Officer and a member of the Management Board of Siemens AG with global responsibility for human resource, including the areas of diversity, learning and education, social innovation, environmental protection, health management, and safety. Janina holds a master's degree in economics from the University of Mainz and the University of Verona in Italy. She's a mother of teenage twins. She says, if self-commitment of companies doesn't lead to more equality, it is the responsibility of every government to ensure societal progress. We will discuss this in a minute. Welcome, Janina Kugel. Daniela Weber-Rey is a lawyer and non-executive board member at HSBC, Fnac Darty, and the European Corporate Governance Institute. She served as a member of the Corporate Governance Commission for the German Corporate Governance Codex for 12 years until March 2020. 2013 to 2016, she was Chief Governance Officer at the Deutsche Bank. Part of this time, she also served as Deputy Global Head of Compliance. Daniela Weber-Rey was an attorney and partner for almost 30 years at Clifford Chance in various management functions. Besides that, she was a non-executive board member of the BNP Paribas in Paris from 2008 to 2013. Mrs. Weber-Rey has 3 grown-up children, and she says, do we really appreciate but the competitive shortcomings, the business risks, and the societal and social price for looking at only half of the workforce while stuffing executive boards with almost only male candidates? We'll also discuss this in a minute. Dorothee Bär, she studied political science in Munich and at the Free University in Berlin. She is a member of the executive board of the CSU since 2001. From 2009 to 2013, she was Deputy Secretary General of the CSU. She's a member of the Bundestag since 2002. From December 2013 to March 2018, she was Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister of Transport and Digital Infrastructure before she took her actual position as State Ministry for Digital Affairs at the Federal Chancellery. She is married with 3 children. She says, the women's quota is not a downfall. So let's start with the first question to Minister Bär. So why is the term quota so negative? Marcel Fratscher of the DEW said in an interview with Die Zeit that he is a quota man, because men have been privileged for centuries and have received positions and privileges because they are men, while successful quota women have received their positions not because of but despite their gender. Do we need to change the wording in our communication maybe for a better acceptance? For example, in Finland, they have a 40-40 ratio, what they call it, men and women in the administration. And Spain, the country with the world's most gender-balanced cabinet, just introduced an equal maternity and paternity leave. So does wording and language maybe make a difference? Minister Bär.
Yes, dear Ilka Hartmann, dear Janina Kugel, dear Mrs. Weber-Rey, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm very delighted to speak at the LSE German Symposium today because I have been planning a trip to London to attend this event. And then unfortunately, Corona came in between, but that shouldn't stop us today to talk about those important issues, such as the necessity of a women's quota. And if I would answer your question shortly, I would say, of course, language always makes a difference. And of course, language matters, but maybe I can point it out a little bit further. So in my opinion, now we have a women's quota, not sufficient yet, but of course we did some steps. And I think that the women's quota can help to offset the disadvantage women face in certain positions. The German government now already made a good proposal with drafting the law for the equal participation of women in management positions in the private sector, in the public sector. So you mentioned it, Ilka, 3 weeks ago. I think this was one step we really needed, but of course, this is not the end. However, a women's quota is not enough. We shouldn't miss to introduce young girls to economic and digital topics as early as possible. So for us, or for my party, we want to start in kindergarten already, of course, always depending on the age and always depending on what we are talking about and showing them. But I think that is very necessary. To teach children digital skills, including learning a programming language, for example. And this would ensure that these abilities, which are so essential for the future, become a normal part of our children's education. And especially in this age, there is no big difference between boys and girls. So we have to get children interested in the digital transformation, and the ability to swipe and click isn't enough. That's very important for our competitiveness and not least for our digital sovereignty. Only if we introduce girls to digital technology will they be interested in taking up STEM professions later as young women. So that is another important step, not only a quota, not only language, but really to give everyone the possibility. I'm very much in favor of teaching the fundamentals of programming, data analysis, digital ethics, and robotics in primary school as basic skills alongside reading, writing, and of course, math. Of course, the lessons have to be age appropriate, as I mentioned. We need more women in the technology sector, not only to ensure greater diversity, but also to shape the digital transformation from a wide range of perspectives. And this is not just about equal opportunities, it's also about economics. After all, it's important that digitization is also given a female perspective. I think if we only talk along men, and I think some years ago, it was already a little bit better. Now I think we have some steps back. We don't have the female perspective all over the place. Sometimes it's okay to have only guys on the stage again. And I think we really have to talk about that in the public way more often. Last but not least, women need to play a greater role in political parties and in politics in general. And of course, I have the discussion for 16 years now. Not every man, but a lot of men still say, what do you want? You already have the chancellor. And that's great. And I'm really happy that we have Angela Merkel for 16 years now, but only to have a chancellor and not to have, for example, a cabinet with half men and half women is not appropriate nowadays. And I think now it's not an advantage to have a half and half cabinet, but it's a big, big disadvantage all over the world if you don't do it that way. So the more diverse teams are, the more successful they are, and women must be at the table for all the important political or scientific decisions. So thank you very much. I'm looking really forward to the discussions, and yeah, maybe next time we discuss it even on the stage, half men and half women.
That would be wonderful. Thank you for the intro statement. And I would then go to Janina Kugel. The topic has been with you for a long time. You were a human resource director at Siemens, a company that is still man-dominated a little bit. What did you do in your role to promote female managers? What programs did you introduce? And were these programs successful, or did you have a backdrop? And if so, what were the reasons? And if you would say, after you left Siemens, what is the footprint you left with Siemens? What's your inheritance for your successors in Siemens?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's like we speak here today about gender diversity, but generally, I would just like to re-emphasize that diversity is more than gender. And it's pretty much like including the entire society you have in a company or in an organization. Now, talking about the programs, I mean, let me be a little bit provocative. We can speak about placement, succession planning, having force lists, doing mentoring programs, sponsorings, and all of that is important to also encourage young or not so young female leaders or female managers. But on the other hand, I think there comes something really in place that not everyone knows, and that is the bias in decision making. Human people or people don't take objective decisions. We take decisions based on people that are just like us. And as long as mostly the power lies in the hand of at least officially heterosexual men, they pick people that are just like them. And everyone else who is not like them is going to be not really picked. So programs of promotion and mentoring cannot replace the final decision making of really bringing people in place. Now, I believe that is one thing in sociology, and those of you that actually want to go deeper, Rosabeth Kanter, a sociologist from Harvard, actually made the first research on that already in her 70s. So I think that is really worthwhile to actually know. And the other thing is, of course, you measure. If you don't measure progress, if you don't really come up with numbers, and personally, what I never succeeded in Siemens is to get the majority voting in the executive management team. I personally also believe that if you want to disrupt patterns, you have to incentivize it. So most companies that are successful in promoting diversity are actually having a binding part to the compensation of senior managers, and then you suddenly see it works. And let me make maybe one more statement also, because you said in your introduction that people believe that this is going to be, having a gender quota is going to be a disadvantage for organizations. If you look at data, girls are better in schools, girls are having better degrees at universities. I don't say that women or girls are the better human beings, but they're definitely not worse. And that story, that this is a risk for the economical success or whatever success of an organization, is just really an old story, which we shouldn't tell anymore.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Weber-Rey, you used to be against a quota for many years. You sat on the Corporate Governance Commission. What happened? What made you change your mind? What made you customize your opinion a couple of years ago?
Thank you very much, Ilka, first of all, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to discuss here with Janina and Mrs. Bär. First of all, let me say that I think it's very good to have this quota now, because clearly voluntarism failed grandiosely. I would never have expected when I started on this path in 2008, that's 12 to 13 years ago, that it would take so long to provide for change. This law has a signal effect, but it also is not enough. We must leverage on the momentum currently created by the new law and by this movement I want, this campaign. But the draft is inadequate. it is inadequate because only a limited number of companies are really touched by the draft. It's only 70 companies, and 30 of which have no men on the board. So there is way more to be done. On top of these 30 men are grandfathered. So let me come back to your question. Why do I think that this is right now? Let me remind you that in 2008, I was the first woman, and for I think quite a while, the only woman on the Government Commission for the Code. We introduced a recommendation to watch diversity at the level of the boards, both boards. And I recall vividly how, let's say, half of the men completely of the commission itself found it really weird of me to use the term diversity to introduce who will understand that term. Then I used the German term Vielfalt and diversity in brackets. Klaus-Peter Müller, who was also pushing very much for this recommendation, we both said, well, we have to go this way because nothing is changing. Then we got it into the codex and simply nothing changed. Yeah? The industry just seemed to laugh at us. Then we toughened the wording. It became clearer in its recommendation. Nothing changed. Then the government was fed up by this no reaction and introduced first initiatives of its own, and still very little changed. Only when the clear supervisory board quotas were introduced, when it was a legal obligation with a so-called empty chair rule, when you don't vote in compliance with the law that the chair needs to be empty, only then things did change. So we are living in a society in Germany where at least industry leaders don't have the conviction that it is beneficial for them to really look for women. Their excuse is always, we don't find the women. But as Janina and I both said in our prior discussion just prior to the start, we are absolutely convinced that we can always find the woman who would fit well into that job. So it is clear that also these changes that are now going to start will take time just because of the numbers, and because it only covers such a very limited number of companies in the private sector. But we heavily need that step to catch up with our neighboring countries who are so much more advanced. It's not just the UK and the US. It is really humiliating to see how much further France is, the Netherlands are, not to talk about the northern countries. Even Spain and Portugal are much more advanced as regards equal treatment of women in top business positions than Germany is. And we should really ask ourselves, why is that so? And I think the cultural change, the societal cultural change, is the true challenge we are meeting. And since we haven't been able to achieve this, even though there was quite a drive now for a number of years, I think the quotas are the only means I can think of now to place women at eye level with men, so that they get used to having women around them of equal quality. And then the mini-me effect that Janina just described so vividly, that we tend all, not only men, us women too, we tend to pick those who are similar to us. The mini-me effect will be minimized because we see all kinds of other people. And I agree, we don't only talk about gender diversity, there are many other topics covered by diversity. We look at other people as well.
Thank you very much. And yeah, Dorothee, you've already mentioned that one chancellor is not enough, and that it's good that we have the law now established, but a lot of other things have to change. And I think the CSU has already announced a quota which you will step by step reach the 50% up until 2025. But as Frau Weber-Rey also mentioned, the mindset has to change. And as we look, how does the party plan to achieve that? And how can you inspire more women for politics and political offices? Because if I'm correct, currently there's only 25% of the members of your party and the CDU is female, but you're going for a 50% quota. So it's really necessary, I think, that you acquire some more women for politics and for political offices.
Yes, and that's how you mentioned in the beginning. It has a lot to do how you talk to a woman, how you try to attract them. And so, for example, if I see my girlfriends, they don't find it attractive to commute every week between Bavaria and Berlin. You really have to want that. And then you have to always defend the way you are living. I think that is one big problem in Germany too, that always the model the family next door lives is, if it's a different model, then I don't know, then you are scared and you don't know why do they do it in a different way. And I think that is really a really big problem, and you always have to defend your own family model. That is one thing. Language, you mentioned already how you talk to them. And if we still have discussions where people say, stop the whole gender gaga and we don't want to talk about that anymore, and it's not allowed to say anything anymore in this country, I think that is a really big problem as well. And on the other side, for us, in the objective, it's not a problem. But in Bavaria, for example, my party wins all or almost all of the constituencies. So, and in a constituency, only one person is running. And so only one. So, and if you have a list, for example, for the European Parliament, my party had on the first 11 spots on this list were 6 women and 5 men. There it's possible to have a quota there in between the party. But in my constituency, of course, I'm the only one from my party, and I don't share my constituency with a man either. So I think that is a really tough problem, and parties who don't win constituencies have it a little bit more easy. But to get more people in the parties, it's tough because if I compare it in the ages where women are, they are working, they have kids, then it starts that they have to take care of their own parents or their parents-in-law. And then if they have to decide, do I volunteer in the kindergarten or in school, or do I join a party? You know what's more attractive. And I try that for 20 years now, and I'm not even able to convince all of my closest girlfriends to join a party and do maybe some politics on the local level. They don't find it attractive. And I think there are some possibilities. Now Corona showed us that it's possible to attend a Gemeinderat or a Stadtrat meeting in a video session, so you can stay at home and do it, for example. Then I think what would help if you don't put a session and you say it starts at 7 p.m. for women. I felt it always helped to say not only when it starts, but when it ends. Because I do politics for, I don't know, more than 25 years now. And I liked it when I was in the United States that it was always the end of the session. And that makes it easier. And what you don't have, that everyone has to say everything over and over and over again. And I tried so many years when I only had one child. When I had my first child, I really tried to be the last one to go home. And I always failed, because then I said, no, it's not worth it. I don't want to be the last one. So I go earlier and I don't experience that men think the same. So I think that the end of a session is very important too.
Thank you. So this is the soft facts, how do we to behave in office and in business and on boards. You know, meetings don't have to be at 6 in the morning and at midnight. Janina, at the presidential inauguration, Amanda Gorman said, once little girls see it, little girls can be it. This saying has been gone around the world, but it proves, and numerous scientific studies show how important networks and role models are for developing and seizing career opportunities. How do we manage to get more role models, and how do we make, this is one thing, but how do we make them visible? and I mean, role model is not just being in the position, but being someone like Minister Bär, being a mother in a great position.
I think role models are always very important, and we spoke indirectly quite a lot about it. It's like, how can we attract young girls to STEM as well as young boys or little boys also to more social work, right? That's role modeling as well. I think what you have to take into consideration is always what a society looks like. And what Dorothee actually just said is like, what's the expectation of what is the role that the mother should do? What's the role that the fathers do? How, I mean, who does how much of the care work, right? And that is where Germany lags enormously behind, and most of the other countries as well, because the care work is mostly done by women. And that, of course, I mean, the day only has 24 hours, so you actually have to bring all of that together. And on top of that, I think to get more role models, you also need to change the system of childcare and of schools. If you have schools that end at midday, and, I mean, I have several children, if they all, like come home at a different point, of course, organizing all of it becomes a little bit more difficult. And so role models, and to attract them, does also mean that we have to be aware that adapting to a group does not always mean that women or people of color or people with a migration background or people from the LGBTIQ community adapt to the typical male behavior that we very often see in place. But inclusion means that we open up for different behavior that is actually allowed. So what Dorothee said is like that we're not only saying when a meeting starts, but also when it ends, because it has really an impact on a lot of people. That then, for example, would a change of pattern. And I think as long as we have a few women at the top or a few different people than mostly in the community at the top, that makes already the first part. But as long as it means that everyone has to adapt to the behavior that is happening in an organization, in a company, in a party, it is not attractive enough for others to join. So I think, and there comes again here a measure that I want to explain, because when we speak about 30%, okay, of quota, I mean, that number does not come out of the blue. That number comes because you need 30% of different thinking people to change culture. So one woman enough is not sufficient. One gay person is not sufficient to change the culture of thinking. And to attract more role models, to see that it's possible, but to also not trying to be someone else than you maybe want to be, that means that we have to include more different people to change society, or to change also the culture of an organization. Yeah. So I would like, you see that I'm trying to answer a little bit away from those buzzwords only, because the buzzwords don't help us anywhere. We need to understand where it's coming from and why and what we can do to change it. Because we have been speaking about role models for the last 3 decades. We've been speaking about social impact for the last 3 decades. But if we, for example, start comparing Scandinavia, Germany, the Netherlands, France, or whatever, we have to look deeper into societal structures, into taxation systems, into expectations that we see. And we cannot expect that we don't change those role models and those role model behavior and then see a bigger representation of women or of people with a migration background in the top of organizations.
Thank you very much. That brings me to the international part again. And Frau Weber-Rey, you have some experience, a long tradition in France. And we spoke about that before. When Kamala Harris became the first female vice president of the United States, the press commented very broadly on her white suit. Comments on looks and clothing hardly ever appear when man gets promoted. You have lived in France, and you told me that in our pre-discussion that we should not make women into men, and that in France especially, women make it to the top as women. What is different in France than in Germany?
Well, first of all, I would like to look not only at France, but the US, but let's start with France. In France, embarrassingly for us, there are way more women working. There are way more children per woman, which we would think is not really a possible combination. There are way more women in top positions, and they all look really like elegant, charming women. It is a must in top positions in France to be elegant, to look good, and yet you absolutely are able to make your standpoint. And I couldn't agree more with Janina and everybody else here on the panel. It's just ridiculous to sort of imitate the man in clothing or in whatever way. Just being yourself and being proud of being a woman is, I think, really important. But I think the differences between Germany and other countries, France and the US, which are my experience, really start much early on. I don't know whether you're aware that I lived a number of years in New York. I was lucky enough to have my first child in New York because we intended to stay there and only came back thereafter. And in New York, when you have your doctor visits during pregnancy, you find brochures on the table about working mothers, working breastfeeding mothers, how are the techniques you can use. So education to combine your natural role as a woman with working life is so obvious, is so commonplace that you find it everywhere. You don't have to look for it. That's a big, big, big difference. In France, the difference is that when you have a baby, there is something happening which I call nature's call. You're just overwhelmed, at least when it happens the very first time, overwhelmed by your child. And in Germany, the social system wants to protect us, and it may be good for many people, but that protection is not so helpful when you really want to make a career, because you're under that pressure to use part-time work, to step out of work for years, and then you may never find your way back to a full career. You may work, but there's no full career. In France, there is no protection of this type, at least not, it's only company-wise, and then you can only step out for a shorter period. And when you ask yourself as a young mother, have I invested all that time and energy into my education to step out and get no protection, or to continue to work? I continue to work, and funnily enough, it works. So the incentives that are meant to protect women in Germany also work against us, because there are so many options, and the societal pressure not to be a raven mother, eine Rabenmutter, is so big, yeah, that many females just don't manage to get going at the very start of their career, which is coincidentally the same time that they have their children, because it happens nowadays in the 30s. It is not only, it's not only about clothing, it's not only about the career woman once she stands there. We have to start way more early to find it absolutely natural for a woman to combine family life and career and go forward confident of herself, being a woman in all facets of her female life.
That's great. And exactly on that topic, I would like to bring in Dorothee Bär again, because you said, is it that the women choose not to do the career because of the family? Because Mr. Bär once said in an interview that who's doing the careers in Germany? It's men without a family. No, it's men with family first. Then second, it's men without a family. Then it's women without a family, and number 4 is women with family. So is it also maybe because women in these positions are not hired as much as men, because, you know, she stays at home, she takes the 6 days of the kids? Is it 2 aspects to the medal, Dorothee Bär?
Well, it's not a saying from me. So that's just, those are the figures. So it's not only family, but it's if you have kids. So men with kids do the most, on the career ladder on top, and then men with kids, then women without kids, and then women with kids. So I think it starts what Mrs. Weber-Rey said, that you all of a sudden, if you're pregnant, you're invisible. I think this is one of the points that no one talks about you anymore or talks with you anymore, talks about you, yes, they still do, but don't plans with you. And I had this a few months ago. It was luckily not from my party, but it was a different party in the parliament, but I had some colleagues over in the chancellery and we were discussing digital issues, and all of a sudden I was asking for a colleague of those two guys, and they said, oh, you don't have to plan with her. I'm like, why is she dropping out of parliament? No, she's pregnant now. I'm like, yeah, okay, and what does that mean? Yeah, I think she's going to come back. And that's what I experienced too, 3 times, that all of a sudden you are invisible and everyone says, well, now she can't run here again or there again. And so many people who don't care about you at all normally tell you, oh, please take care of your kids, or I'm still thinking about your kids. I'm like, no, I think it's enough if the parents are doing it and not random strange people. I think that's one of the points too. And what Mrs. Weber-Rey said, I don't know if I see it to have 100% the same. I think that you really have to have both possibilities. I have one woman in my team in a very high leading role, and she decided to drop out of her job twice for 3 years because she really wanted to be with her kids 3 years, and she came back in a top position. And I think that has to be normal too if someone wants it exactly that way. If she knows what she is doing, if she decides to do so, not because she has to or a husband or society forces her, because it was her own decision on that point. And then that's what I meant when the people next door is living a different model. It wouldn't have been my model. So I always worked again after giving birth immediately. But if someone wants to do it the different way, then that's fine with me too.
Great. I see we get a lot of questions in the Q&A. So I would give one final question to all 3 of you. So in order to be on time and have Dorothee Bär being able to leave on time, I would all 3 of you ask the following. First, what would your advice be for a young female professional? And second, if you would have only one wish, what would you ask from the government, and what would you ask from the business? Maybe you start, because then we can say farewell to you and you'll be on time.
What would I say, young girls? I think the same what I tell my own, that the most important thing is to not listen to people you would never ask for advice. I think that's the most important one. Just do your thing and don't let anyone get the power to get you down on this point. What's important for business? Well, my wish is that everyone in business is as great as Janina Kugel and supports us in our politics, and is such a great role model for women. And we need more, we need more Janina Kugels in business.
So we need a clone of you. Janina, what would you say? Your advice for young professionals?
Thank you for the flowers, Dorothee, first of all. I think I would say to the girls, be courageous, figure out what you want to do, and find the right partner. If you want to spend your life with someone, then find the right person to do it, and discuss it before you start a life with that person, okay? Because I think it's all very clear, every life, every career, and especially a career with a family, needs more than 2 hands to actually make it happen. So you always need a support structure, and if you have to fight against your own family, that is going to be a little bit more difficult. And from government, societal progress does not happen by slow evolutions. Every societal progress we made, think about like 1918, when in Germany they were fighting for women to have the right to vote. If you look at advances of racial discrimination in different countries, it only went on because people were fighting for it. And just because you were mentioning the US beforehand, remember when we had a very famous judge from the Supreme Court dying a few weeks ago or a few months ago, the entire world was humbling what she has been succeeding to reach as progress for the United States. But those of you that haven't seen the movie about Ruth Bader Ginsburg should actually watch it to realize what life she had in the 50s when she was a young, fabulous lawyer and couldn't really make it because societal expectations were there as well. So don't forget, changes only happen if people are fighting it for it and pushing for it. And that means that we have to be courageous. And so that's my expectation from everyone. And government needs to represent, as you said in the introduction, the entire society, that is men, that is women, that is people of different gender, etc., etc.
Thank you. Frau Weber-Rey.
Well, for me, the most important is, and I have an adult daughter and 2 daughters-in-law, is to really choose your life as a young woman, to really see the options and never choose just between family or career, to really consider that both can work together. And I will repeat the 2 sort of slogans that I like to use, have used repeatedly: move away from Kinder, Küche, Kirche, from children, kitchen, church, to Kinder, Krippe, Karriere, children, daycare, and career. So the famous 3 Ks in Germany. I think that is really the most important thing. What I am really distressed about is when I have mentees of mine telling me, I can't have a child right now, I can't have children, it's going to be later. And then I talk to them again at 35, it's going to be later because I have my career. They just don't consider that both together are possible. And clearly, women who pursue a career and have children have to serve as role models at that level. The other slogan I like to use is fordern und fördern. So the state cannot only promote women, it must also make demands and challenge women, ask women, push women to do things, and create expectations so that it is not only sort of being treated like a minority. We are not a minority, and receiving all kinds of beneficial programs as though we were idiots alongside the men. No, it is asking specific things from us, telling teachers, ask the young woman to be the speaker of the class, the speaker of the school. At very young age, bring them into a position to really go for it, even if they, at this point in time, don't feel fit. This has to start very, very young, because later on, it is just a competitive disadvantage if women don't fight for the same salary, don't fight for the same career steps. So fordern und fördern is what I would say. Thanks.
So that was great advice from 3 big experts, and we are on time. I want to thank Dorothee Bär very much for joining the session today. You can count on us, and all the best for the rest of the day, and whatever you will achieve in the party, we will try to promote some more women while we are here. Thank you so much, Dorothee Bär.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. It was great to see you all. Bye-bye.
Okay, I will then go and start with the questions from the audience. Christina Fiegel, alumna now based in Madrid. She's the mom of a 3-year-old. She said, I appreciate the effort of the quota and the digital skills for girls. However, my experience is that what mostly keeps women in Germany from advancing in their careers as soon as they have children is the dramatically insufficient supply of childcare combined with limited career flexibility offered by employers. What can employers do to offer solutions to support their female talents? Janina,
I mean, Janina obviously has more experience as to what she did in her company, but I would say a lot has been done there. Childcare is available, and for career women who are already some steps on their ladder, I don't see why the investment into a private au pair girl or something of that type is not possible. What I found being a clear career stopper with many of my colleagues when I was at the law firm is that they did not invest into themselves. My husband and I, we spent for many years one full salary into childcare. And I think that was absolutely worth it. We should not rely solely on the state, but the state has made massive progress in the last years, can do a lot more, but I don't think that this can still be the true argument. Janina, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a very important point that you said, Daniela, is you need to, especially in the first years, and usually when you become a parent, you're younger, you have to spend an enormous amount of your salary, as you said, nearly one salary only for childcare. It's worth it because it's advancing your career. It's an investment, right? You shouldn't see it as cost, but as investment. So I would definitely emphasize on that. And that's also, I can only re-emphasize, make a long-term calculation. Don't look at the 1 year or the 2 years of what is going to be a situation, but look at it in a more perspective. Nevertheless, I mean, I mentioned that already. And I was just been finishing my book, and I have been doing some research and figure out what I also didn't know really beforehand. Germany, after the Second World War, re-emphasized the pattern and the role models of women and men, even with legislation. So I would say, Daniela, yes, we have been progressing, but still the fact that schools are mostly stopping at lunchtime. The question, or for example, in rural areas, you do not find kindergarten, and there is a huge amount of kindergarten places that are missing, makes it less easy. And we also don't have to forget that there is a lot of people in the workforce that cannot afford private childcare, right? I mean, because the world is not existing of people with an academic background only and a high salary. So therefore, I believe that the state definitely has to do that. And one more thing, and I know that there's an international crowd there, we have something in place that nearly no country has, and that's called Ehegattensplitting. That's a tax splitting for being married. It has nothing to do with families. It has nothing to do with how many children you have, which is like a total difference to, for example, to France. And all of things have to come together. So I would say it's like every one of us has to push for it. And those of you that still are in taking the decision, if you're not courageous, what Dorothee Bär also said, you need to take your own choices. I think Daniela and me, we have always been one of the very few women in top of organizations, being mothers as well. I had plenty of moments where I left earlier than anyone else, and I did it. I was disrupting the pattern, but I also provided the opportunity for others to live it differently. And that's what I always have seen as my goal, that I'm also giving different role model behavior and that I'm changing culture to make it easier for others to come, men and women. Because one thing is also very clear, if you look at some of the last studies, it's not that men don't want to spend time with their families, but still social acceptance is less for men than for women. And so I think we should just make family life together easier.
Thank you. And I have a question from Jürgen Schiffer, a student at the Technical University in Munich, that I completely agree towards a women's quota in top management positions. But isn't the problem the middle management that is not concerned from the quota? Because if there are not enough women, where should you choose in the future the female top managers from?
There are enough women. That saying that there is not enough women is just, let me be really frank. I mean, enough women to find 30% of the representation, that's all we are speaking currently about it, okay? And if you then, it's not, I know that we're not having 30% engineering students, female engineering students, but it's not about having the entire population of engineers 30% women. We're speaking here about certain positions, right? So we're only speaking about a few hundred jobs in every country or a few jobs in every organization, and you will always find it, but you also have to change the way how you look at jobs, what you're asking for. So if you always have the same job pattern as James' job description, you will never find different people. if you want to have a research about that, and yes, I agree to your question, of course, they have to be nurtured in the junior management, in the middle management, but then you have to look at the entire, what Daniela also said, fördern and fordern. If you want to have some research data, BCG Germany has actually just done a study on that, launched in November. You find it on the websites of like really making clear statements that the pipeline is full. It's about changing patterns and changing the ideas, how to find the right people.
And for example, the Corporate Governance Code has introduced already a number of years ago the necessity by way of recommendation to set out the career path of women 2 levels below the board. And I think that is what most companies are doing nowadays also. They look at the pipeline, they look at the feeder pool that leads up to the top, and we must develop clear guidelines as to how many women move up the ladder, to never reduce the percentage of available women when it goes to the next career step. This I find is a very valuable tool. So let's say at board -5, there are 40% of women in leadership position. When they move up to the next level, there should still be at least 40% women amongst the leaders. And if you set that goal, and it should be followed up, I mean, that leadership pipeline should be followed up by clear bonus criteria for the board members, then you get there. There's absolutely no doubt you get there. The company needs to do it.
Right, and we have Lukas Tohoff, student at the Leuphana University in Lüneburg. He's asking, how do women and girls from disadvantaged society, socioeconomic background benefit from the quota and the discussion so far?
I think that's a very wide question, and you're pointing on a very, very good point that has something to do with the education system in Germany, and not so much really, I believe, with the gender focus. Germany is a country in which the question what education level your parents have is so much correlated with the own level that you're reaching. That means it's like, you know, our school system is pretty much clear. If your parents have an academic background, you're much more likely to get an academic background as well, etc. This would ask for a total reform of the education system. Germany has been getting feedback on that for more than a decade, on how it looks like, what it looks in OECD rankings in the PISA study. And I would really emphasize and tell you that I fully support your idea. There is much that we need to do to really get there. Companies can, again, here only change the way that they recruit people, the way where they attract people, but companies only recruit employees once they have done and they have finished their education, whatever that education does. And what you are asking for is something that happens before company actually make an influence. I can tell you about one thing maybe that we did at Siemens, and Siemens is still doing that. And that is, for example, when people would apply for a Ausbildung, right? I mean, so for pretty much like an education, a dual vocational training, we were pointing not only on marks of people, but, you know, having ability tests with them and figuring out what they could do and introduce them also to the professions and what they could earn, to also, you know, advocate for vocations and educations that were not known to every societal aspect. So there is a few things that I think we can do, but to that we would need to have a broader reform of the education system. And I think all of you, and I saw a few comments that currently go through Corona and through COVID with children in the education system, we can clearly see what the lack is. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that I see very little understanding in politics to that point in the moment.
Right. So let's go to the next one is Wendy Sprock, self-employed accountant, and how can opportunities be made more visible for women returning after a long break? How much does experience managing a family count in business, and how important are the Quereinsteiger?
Well, I personally think that a lot of what you learn as a mother to juggle your job and juggle the kids organizational capacities that you develop if you didn't have them before are extremely valuable also in business life. Setting priorities is something you really learn in family life, is of extreme importance in business life. So I think working and having a family is really beneficial in both directions, and you can build on that when you come back. But for me, the most important thing when women step out, or the experience I have with women in my teams or who reported to me, is that they stay in contact with their job environment. They perhaps don't need to work if they choose to step out, but they need to stay in contact, and the company needs to make an effort for them to stay in contact by inviting them to certain wrap-up meetings, or when new projects start, or continuing education exercises, or self-development exercises within groups of people from the same company, so that these females stay part of the organization, and when they come back, they have a much better chance of being reintegrated. It's much more challenging for those who completely stepped out, have no job to return to, and have to prove themselves again. I think that is really harder.
Janina, I have a question for you, because you've already tackled that subject before. René Reuter, a student from the University in Halle, asked, doesn't diversity include more than what we are talking about at the moment? Shouldn't we also look at intersectional characteristics? What is being done to include women of color? What is being done to include women of lower classes, non-cigarette people, and so on? I think you've in your previous statement, you've always said.
Yes. I mean, I actually have to tell you, I have been annoyed for a long time that when in Germany the discussion is about diversity, we only speak about gender, and actually only a subset of gender, which is men and women. I think it's much more broader. So yes, I can only agree. And you also heard that in the beginning. I'm opening up every panel of like saying it is more. I think we need to continuously speak about more. I can actually only tell you that in that respect, Germany is very conservative, and we haven't really seen the societal representation that we're having to have more discussions on it. But as you most probably have noticed, that there's always discussions now coming up on, for example, a quota for people with a migration background, even though I dislike the fact or the name, the wording of migration background, because in the United States, you would never think about like who came like 3 decades or like 3 generations ago into the country. I would believe that everyone is German that lives here and has a German passport. Oh, by the way, I mean, everyone makes a contribution independent from the passport. So I can actually only agree to you, and I would very much look forward that the German government after the next election is also going to make very clear statements and nominating the top positions, like we've seen it in Canada, in the United States, in New Zealand, of really like nominating also representation. But let me maybe make one more comment. If you have an inclusive culture, you are inclusive for everyone, no matter whether it's a different skin color or a different gender, because that means that you're accepting human beings as human beings, and that is who we are. We are all human. And I think that should matter, and not how different we are from each other. So thank you for that question. I think it's a very important topic that you're mentioning here.
Is it coming to
change? Ilka, let me just add to this. When I joined the BNP Paribas board in Paris in 2008, there was a diversity program which I was also able to attend because I asked to attend it to understand what they were doing there. Diversity already 12, 13 years ago in France was discussed much more widely than in Germany. In Germany, it's always reduced to men and women. In France, it always covers all the criteria that Janina mentions. And in fact, there are 2 different words. Diversité is the wider term, but mixité is the term used for women and men diversity. So, I mean, an issue that you had raised with Dorothee Bär before, language does play a role also. And clearly, in Germany, we discuss diversity in a way too limited sense.
Thank you. And a question that's you adding on to this one and has been asked many times, what can we do? What is the most effective way to trigger cultural and society change in this respect? I can read about 10 questions. They all go in the same direction, but what besides the quota can we do to change the sentiment?
We should live differently, I think. Is what was very surprising for me is how many people are writing to me and they say is like, you're one of the very few Black females that we see, you know, that are at the top of every organization. So I think the relevant part is, and I think you can hear that in those of you that maybe know me or have met me already, I mean, I am who I am, and I'm not trying to be someone else that I'm not. I don't try to become a white heterosexual man, because I'm not. And that's also not, it's also not necessary. A man doesn't try to be a woman. And I think this is what really matters. It's only coming back to that we speak out about it, that we educate about it. And for many of you, and I could see that many of you seem to be still at university. And I know that this is a discussion, and honestly, I can remember what I had of an opinion when I was 25. There's a strong belief that it doesn't matter, but there will come times in your life where you actually believe and you realize that it matters who you're from. I mean, what you look like, what gender you have, what you're thinking of. And here, I believe if you see and you do not wait until you experience things personally, but you understand and you actually have the empathy to realize what happened to other people and you live that inclusiveness, then I think you also draw different pictures. We have different role models, and we can actually show that the society is much more on all of the levels of the organization than it seems like it. And maybe like the last comment, also because I'm getting that question very often, women are not automatically the better managers or the better leaders. Not at all. Again, here, I can only bring it back to say is like, we are human beings, but we have to also be very clear that sometimes we have to draw very consequential, different decisions to make advancement happening.
Ilka, let me just touch on one other point we didn't mention. I mean, clearly this question goes to the politics. Politics need to change, but cultural change means, in my view, not only for all of us standing somewhere at the top to be ourselves and not to try to be differently, is to act as role models and take on mentees, as many as you can. There is a lot of research having been done on how to change the behavior of younger people. It is role models, role models, role models. And that is why it is also so important to have the limited number of females who are at the top and who are willing and able to talk, and hopefully who even have children, to have them talk and to be seen by others, to see that it is possible to go this way and to just give it a try. I mean, I never wanted to pursue the career I did. I just always at every step said yes and moved on. So it is just the courage to move on that is really important, and to be convinced that you can end up there if you want to. Nobody has to want to. Many people just like to be in the flow. That's totally fine. But those who want to, they must be able and encouraged to take the step, and they need role models.
Right. And we have a question from Mara Weidemann from the University of Mannheim. She said, would you consider different ratios for different industries? She said, I'm asking because I applied for a so-called Spring Week, which was 1 week inside into all kinds of banks. I got more offers than my male best friend, even though his CV, cover letter and skills were better than my qualification. I'm grateful, but I do understand that it is hard for young, fair men to accept the big picture. And I have the feeling that most of the female friends do not see banking as an interesting career. So there's somebody who thinks she got the job because of the quota.
Well, I come from the banking sector, and the banking sector obviously is one of the most challenged sectors, and it is not because of lack of females, as you may perhaps argue for engineering or other mint jobs. It is simply that that there is not the possibility given to women to really move up. They are not pushed as much, not challenged as much, and I have had my fair bunch of frustrations with women I pushed too hard, and who then dropped out and did not want to be pushed. So that's why I say we have to start much earlier. I would be against different types of quotas per industry. So that is a clear no, because we would never sort of get going for the cultural change if there is not a clear guideline. And I have two sons and one daughter. So I always said my aim is not to provide the open path for my daughter and have my sons drop out. That is definitely not the case. But the sons, by our educational and societal system, if they don't have that type of support that I was able to provide, and by the way, my husband also was able to provide to both sons and daughters, to push equally in the same direction, to make the best of themselves, and they all choose very, very different career paths. One of them is a complete bio-freak living on the countryside, so they chose very, very different careers. But you have to push both men and women for that. But the male young children still have an advantage. When you look around yourself, you just see it. When you listen to a talk, it's the men who talk all the time. I just had that yesterday. And the woman, you have to ask them and they have to push. So I think it is good to have a certain preferential treatment by way of the quota for a time being, but it will be filled soon, and then the quotas won't matter anymore. And definitely the good men have to move forward, and we will push them forward. This country, because of its demographics, needs both the top men and the top women. Just for the women, we have to challenge them more. That's all.
That was a great statement. Yeah, Janina, just add to that, because we have
I just want to ask that young lady a question. Why do you believe your male colleagues that have been applying for the same jobs had a better application, a better CV, or whatever? How do you know what the respective banks are looking for? I can actually only tell you, having good marks at university, and sorry if there's some professors attending, does not make the trick. It's not going to be, I mean, only because you have good marks at university that you're going to be a great manager, or that you are good in managing people. So you don't know what the qualification was. And by the way, only because you have a super scripted application letter could be, of course, worthwhile. Honestly, I don't read application letters because, I mean, you know, I want to speak with a person to see that. If you have maybe less internships, but you have a life experience, that is really giving you a much better picture. It makes you a better human being. So I just want to challenge you back of like saying, oh, how did you measure to believe that your application was worse than the application of your colleagues? And another statement, I would fully agree to what Daniela said, is like every company and every organization does always look for the best person. No company in the world can afford of like not having a qualified person only because of his or her gender. That will not happen. But sometimes you need more time to look for different people. And I think that time is always well established. And the last comment, because I have heard that as well. Again, here, we're only speaking about max 30%. Implicitly, we had a male quota of 90% for decades. 30% gender quota in that respect for women still leaves 70% for men. So I don't see a disadvantage. Okay, I mean, so I think get real and really also do the calculation of mathematics. That's just what I want to mention.
Well, I think that was two great final words from Janina and Daniela Weber-Rey. I want to add, okay, there is no single solution to correct the gender imbalance in leadership very quickly, so that problem will stay with us a little longer. And let me close with the words from Margarita Delgado from the Banco de España. She said, talent and hard work should be considered, acknowledged and promoted no matter what package they come in. And I think this is what we really covered here. Thank you very much to my wonderful panel and to the participants. And I turn back to Isolde Hegemann from the LSA.
Thank you very much. A big thank you to our three speakers, Mrs. Kugel, Mrs. Weber-Rey, and Mrs. Bär. It was certainly an insightful discussion, and despite all the obstacles that were mentioned, made hope for a new and diverse generation of leaders. And thank you, Mrs. Hartmann, for the engaging moderation. To our audience, thank you for your attention, as well as the many questions in the Q&A section. With a variety of events awaiting us today, we are looking forward to seeing you at many of them and hope you will enjoy the rest of the conference week. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you very much.